The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of London as thousands of tourists gathered outside the gates of the royal palace. Among them stood Marcus Chen, a 32-year-old marketing consultant from California who had saved for 3 years to bring his family on this dream vacation to England. His wife Sarah walked beside him, camera in hand, while their 2 children darted between the crowds, excitement lighting up their faces. Marcus had always been fascinated by British history and the pageantry of the Royal Guards. He had watched countless documentaries about the changing of the guard ceremony and felt his heart race as he finally witnessed it in person. The guards stood motionless in their iconic red tunics and bearskin hats, their faces showing no emotion despite the chaos of tourists surrounding them. Behind them, massive horses stood equally still, their dark coats gleaming in the morning light. The Chen family made their way closer to the barriers, trying to get the perfect photograph. Sarah raised her camera repeatedly, but every shot seemed blocked by someone's head or arm. The crowd pressed forward, everyone wanting their moment with the historic scene. Marcus felt the frustration building. They had traveled so far, spent so much money, and he wanted at least one perfect family photo to commemorate the trip. Near the barrier, another tourist caught Marcus's attention. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive leather jacket despite the warm weather. He spoke loudly on his phone in a language Marcus didn't recognize, gesturing wildly as he argued with whoever was on the other end. This man, and whose name Marcus would later learn was Viktor Petrov, seemed oblivious to the people around him as he paced back and forth near the mounted guards. Viktor had his own story of frustration that morning. A successful real estate developer from Moscow, he had flown to London for what was supposed to be a quick business meeting. The deal had fallen through at the last minute, costing him millions of dollars. His business partner had betrayed him, stealing clients and contracts that Viktor had spent years cultivating. Now, walking through the tourist district trying to clear his head, he felt anger burning through every fiber of his being. As Viktor argued on the phone, he barely noticed where he was walking. He bumped into tourists, knocked over a child's ice cream, and generally created a path of disruption wherever he went. And the mounted guard in front of him sat perfectly still on his horse, a magnificent black stallion named Wellington. The horse had served in the Queen's Guard for 5 years and had stood through thunderstorms, fireworks, and countless tourist encounters without flinching. Marcus watched Viktor with growing annoyance. The man's loud voice and careless movements were ruining the serene atmosphere of the ceremony. Sarah tugged at Marcus's sleeve, suggesting they move to a different spot. But Marcus shook his head. He had claimed this position after 20 minutes of careful navigation through the crowd, and he wasn't about to give it up now. The argument on Viktor's phone reached a crescendo. His face turned red, veins bulging on his forehead as he shouted into the device. Then, in what seemed like an explosion of rage, he hung up and threw his phone into his pocket with such force that several people nearby jumped in surprise. Viktor stood there, breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. What happened next would change Viktor's life forever and create an international incident that would dominate news cycles for weeks. In his blind fury, Viktor turned and found himself face to face with Wellington, the guard's horse. The massive animal stood there, calm and majestic, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the man before him. Something in Viktor's angry mind seemed to snap. Perhaps it was the horse's calmness in contrast to his own chaos. Perhaps it was a desire to exert control over something, anything, after losing control of his business empire. Now, or perhaps it was simply the culmination of years of entitlement and privilege that had taught him he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. Whatever the reason, Viktor made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. He reached out and placed both hands against Wellington's shoulder. The crowd nearby fell silent, sensing something was wrong. Marcus stopped trying to position his camera and watched in disbelief. Sarah gasped, reaching for her children to pull them back. Even other tourists, many of whom had been focused on their own photos and conversations, turned to look at what was happening. The guard mounted on Wellington, Corporal James Mitchell, remained perfectly still as training demanded. However, his eyes flickered downward, watching Victor's movements with growing concern. Mitchell had served in the Guard for 8 years and had seen plenty of inappropriate tourist behavior, but something about this felt different. The intensity in Victor's eyes, the set of his jaw, the way his muscles tensed, these were not the actions of someone posing for a silly photo. Victor pushed against the horse, gently at first, as if testing the animal's weight and balance. Wellington shifted slightly, confused by the unusual pressure against his side. The horse had been trained to stand firm through all manner of disturbances, but this was different from the usual tourist touches and pats. This was sustained, purposeful pressure. Marcus couldn't believe what he was seeing. He wanted to say something, to call out and stop what was clearly about to become a serious situation. But his voice caught in his throat, and he looked around at the other tourists, wondering if anyone else would intervene, but everyone seemed frozen in the same state of shocked disbelief. Victor pushed harder, putting his full weight behind his hands. Wellington whinnied in distress, his ears flattening against his head. The horse took a small step sideways, trying to move away from the uncomfortable pressure, but Victor moved with him, maintaining contact and continuing to push. His face was twisted in concentration and anger, as if all his rage at his failed business deal was being channeled through his arms into this innocent animal. Corporal Mitchell's training kept him from immediately reacting, but he began to shift his weight, preparing to dismount if necessary. His hand moved subtly toward his radio, ready to call for backup. Other guards positioned nearby began to turn their heads, breaking their stoic poses as the situation escalated. The crowd started to murmur, then voices rose in protest. Someone shouted at Victor to stop. A woman screamed. Children began to cry, frightened by the tension in the air. Marcus finally found his voice and yelled, "Stop! What are you doing?" But Victor seemed not to hear, lost in his own world of anger and poor decisions. Wellington, despite his training and calm temperament, was becoming genuinely frightened. The horse's eyes widened, showing white around the edges. His nostrils flared as his breathing quickened. He tried to sidestep again, but Victor, now committed to whatever insane goal he had set for himself, pushed even harder. The man's expensive shoes scraped against the cobblestones as he dug in, trying to generate more force. Sarah began recording on her phone, though her hands shook so badly the footage would later be almost unwatchable. Other tourists did the same, dozens of phones rising into the air, capturing every moment of Victor's increasingly desperate attempt to push over a 1,000-pound animal. These videos would later become crucial evidence in what followed. Corporal Mitchell made his decision. Breaking years of conditioning to remain motionless, he spoke in a firm, commanding voice. "Sir, step away from the horse. Immediately." His words cut through the crowd noise like a knife. Victor looked up, seemingly surprised to remember that there was actually a person mounted on the horse he was assaulting. For a moment, their eyes met. Then Mitchell saw something in Victor's expression that he had seen before in combat zones, a kind of desperate rage that came from a person who had lost everything and no longer cared about consequences. Victor saw in Mitchell's steady gaze a resolve that should have warned him to back away, to apologize, to end this madness before it went any further. Instead, Victor made the worst decision of his life. With a grunt of effort that sounded almost primal, he gathered all his strength and pushed against Wellington with every ounce of force he could muster. The horse, already off balance from the sustained pressure and increasingly frightened by the situation, stumbled. His front leg buckled, and for one horrifying moment it seemed as though the massive animal might actually fall. The crowd screamed. Marcus instinctively threw himself in front of his children, shielding them from what he thought would be a disaster. Sarah dropped her phone, the camera still recording as it clattered to the ground, capturing a dizzying view of feet and cobblestones. Corporal Mitchell, with the skill of an experienced rider, managed to shift his weight and help Wellington regain his balance. The horse recovered, planting all 4 hooves firmly on the ground, but the damage was done. Victor had not only attempted to push over a ceremonial guard horse, but had nearly succeeded in causing serious injury to both the animal and its rider. Within seconds, additional guards converged on the scene. Their ceremonial demeanor vanished, replaced by the efficient movement of trained security personnel. Victor suddenly seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had done. The anger drained from his face, replaced by confusion and the first stirrings of fear. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, but it was far too late for that. Marcus watched as 2 guards grabbed Victor's arms, firmly but professionally securing him. Another guard spoke urgently into his radio, calling for police backup and medical assessment for Wellington. Corporal Mitchell dismounted with practiced ease, immediately turning his attention to his horse, running his hands along Wellington's legs and body, checking for any signs of injury. The crowd, which had been stunned into silence by the attempted push, now erupted into chaos. Some people pushed forward, trying to get better video of Victor's arrest. Others backed away, wanting distance from the trouble. Parents clutched their children close, explaining in hurried whispers that what they had just witnessed was very, very wrong. Sarah retrieved her phone from the ground, checking to see if it still worked. To her amazement, it had continued recording through everything, capturing audio of the guards' radio calls and Victor's first protests of innocence. She looked at Marcus, her face pale, and whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Victor began to argue with the guards holding him, his English becoming choppy and broken as stress affected his language skills. He seemed to be claiming it was just a joke, just a photograph opportunity, that he meant no harm. But the evidence of dozens of phones and witnesses told a very different story. His expensive jacket was torn at the shoulder where one of the guards had grabbed him. His face was flushed, and sweat poured down his temples. Metropolitan police officers arrived within minutes, their sirens causing fresh alarm among the already agitated tourists. Victor was officially placed under arrest, his rights read to him in English while he protested in a mixture of Russian and broken English. The officers were professional, but firm, clearly taking the incident very seriously. Marcus realized his children were crying, frightened by everything they had witnessed. The dream vacation moment had turned into something traumatic, something that would require explanation and reassurance for weeks to come. He knelt down and hugged them both, trying to explain that the man had done something very wrong and that the guards and police were there to keep everyone safe. Wellington, and after Corporal Mitchell's thorough examination, appeared physically unharmed, but was clearly distressed. The horse's training had held, but the psychological impact of the assault was evident in his nervous movements and the way his ears kept flicking back and forth. Mitchell spoke soothingly to his mount, maintaining contact, letting Wellington know he was safe now. As police led Victor away in handcuffs, he turned back to look at the crowd one last time. His expression was complex, part defiance, part disbelief, part dawning horror at what his actions might cost him. He seemed like a man waking up from a nightmare, only to discover that the nightmare was real and he was the monster in it. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though many tourists lingered, sharing their videos and photos. exchanging contact information in case they were needed as